Hi, welcome back to the AI Update on the AIX Higher Ed podcast for March 20th, 2026. And we're really focusing on the seismic change that everyone is saying is coming. And for this episode, we really want to look at the AI landscape. And based on some reports from Morgan Stanley, A16Z, some industry research, we really want to talk about knowledge work being done by agents, perhaps directed by us, some cases not even directed by humans. And then also how physical labor is starting to have more economic value. And that's a trend we're going to see continue.
And, to highlight this, Iman Mostak, he was he's a billionaire. He worked in a hedge fund. He has started his own AI, Stability AI. He sold that. Was kind of very involved at the top of kind of what's going on in the AI field and helping society with kind of adaptation and really just starting to articulate some of the economic restructuring that's going to happen. There's a YouTube video called like the next 1,000 days, which they highlight, they kind of get at like, well, what's going to happen with over the next 1,000 days in AI? And it's kind of a little hard to conceptualize, but one thing they said at the beginning that really hit me, he said, well, it's been about 1,000 days since ChatGPT, right? 3.5 came out in November 2022. And look at the advances we've had then. So only imagine the advances we're going to have in the next 3 years where there's a lot more capital being invested in AI's starting to help the improvement process itself. But he's kind of said, and I think a message we've been trying to communicate is that people are not understanding the scale of the unprecedented change. It's like when water turns into gas. We are suddenly not the most capable entities in the world. And then not the smartest entities in the world. And those are like the two major changes that we're coming up against. And I think if you just really think of those things, and even if you don't really believe them, even if you think they can't be true, even if they're only partially true, like we all realize that AI has a lot of capabilities and a lot of intelligence. Even if we do kind of retain the top of the roost, it's having a pretty dramatic impact.
And to underscore this, it's really not about a particular threshold, whether or not it reaches AGI or artificial superintelligence. That's almost irrelevant. The exponential is continuing to increase, and this is where most people really have a hard time getting their head around what that really means. Think of it like investment income for your retirement. Compounding interest is a form of exponential increase, and most people have trouble understanding that, and that's something that they plan for over decades. This is happening right now. We're farther up on that exponential curve than most people realize, and it's hard to really gather what that's going to mean. And this gets us to the Morgan Stanley report that came out this week. And in this, Morgan Stanley is warning their analysts that a transformative leap is imminent, that there's something that's going to be happening very soon, perhaps at the end of this quarter, which is just a couple of weeks away, or very soon in 2026. And what they're outlining is that this breakthrough is really the result of the exponential that we've been talking about. They're saying the scaling laws are holding firm, that executives of major U.S. AI companies are saying that they're telling investors they need a brace for progress that's going to shock them. This is the same thing we've been talking about for quite a while, and we find it shocking just of the progress that we've already seen, and it's just going to increase. And it's not just that it's going to increase in a linear way, but really think about what that exponential means. It's happening faster, the impacts are greater, and it's going to be something that's overwhelming for us to really understand and to implement it. Now, the one upside to that is because it's so overwhelming, it's not going to be as easy for many companies to implement. But it also is going to mean that these gains are going to create a bigger split between those that are getting in and acting on it and those that do not. So it might buy some people some time in the short term, but it only means that they're going to have to pay for that delay a little bit later down the road.
And, it is kind of talking about, how many users, right? Like active users are on ChatGPT. There is this debate. Okay, well, as many people are using ChatGPT, so more people are using Gemini and Anthropic, but that's kind of not really the key point here. The point is that, there are 900 million users, even if some of them have migrated to Gemini and Anthropic models, Claude. Those models are just as powerful, if not more powerful, and for some uses than others. So basically, have 1 billion people at least using these AIs. So so we look at this and we say, well, okay, well. When we talk about this, we've been talking about it, there's going to be job displacement, right? Which is one of the things that's very clear in the Morgan Stanley report, that we're seeing these moves to, whether you call it the one-person company or a company with just a very limited number of an employees and kind of this rapid technological advancing with the recursive self-improvement, that when AI is doing the work, right? Whether it's building products or doing financial work or writing or building the PowerPoints, that is going to result, at least in the short term, in some significant unemployment and layoffs, but that is reducing the cost for the companies. So the cost of those services should decline, or we should start to see some decline, right? Now the companies are actually kind of in a sweet spot where they can still probably charge the same amount for the labor because people don't realize how the products are being produced. But it's costing them a lot less to produce them. And that's why, you see what you call the kind of in the stock market, right? You see people losing their jobs. The economy is weak. I just saw a report come out yesterday that said there really haven't been been no net increase in employment. And it's kind of getting a little scary in that regard, but you see profits increasing at the top kind of technology companies, right? Because you're able to capture all this. But eventually we should see some reduction in cost for consumers. And inflation, today's the 20th, either yesterday or the day before, a new inflation report came out. They decided not to raise interest rates because inflation's running high because of energy prices and other things. But we should start to see, at least in services, at least in knowledge work type services, some declines in cost.
What's interesting about this is the deflationary force is going to be dependent upon how quickly companies start to integrate this technology and what they're doing, as Stefan was saying. And that delay might delay some of that deflationary force, but it's not going to delay it indefinitely. It's something that's really going to only create more of a gap between those companies. Morgan Stanley has a quote in this report that really reminds me of something Thomas Jefferson said, that information is the currency of democracy. And in this case, Morgan Stanley is talking about the coin of the realm is becoming pure intelligence forged by compute and power. And what's striking about this is that first, it kind of takes us back to something we've talked about for a number of weeks, this layer of intelligence over everything. And the companies, the educators, the students that are learning to recognize that layer of intelligence are able to really leverage that to dramatic effect, and much more that we can do with that layer of intelligence. For corporations, for businesses, for really anybody within this economy, an understanding about how to make use of that pure understanding, that pure intelligence is going to drive more within the economy than almost anything else, if not anything else. That's going to be a huge distinction. That's going to set somebody apart and put them in that first category of people moving up the exponential with the technology and the application of the technology. What really resonates for me when I think about that Thomas Jefferson quote is that this could mean really important things societally as well, because when we have access to pure intelligence, that could be taken different directions, of course. It's not to say that it necessarily will mean to a utopic or dystopic vision, but it could have really profound changes for the rest of society. If we have access to that kind of intelligence for surveillance, then it means that we don't have the same kinds of civil liberties and controls over our freedoms that we would have had otherwise. But if it's also used for individuals to be able to wield that pure intelligence for greater effect to impact democracy, to impact societal change, then think of the dramatic changes that could occur because of that. The point of this being pure intelligence is going to drive much of society going forward.
And, we're starting to see, some changes in the consumer market, right? One of which is, ChatGPT maybe becoming a less dominant model, where we see kind of, that original 900 million, right? They were all on ChatGPT. We're seeing a lot of growth in the Gemini. So that's gemini.google.com. You can use it for free at a minimum level. I have some different accounts, and what you get for free, there's a gap between that and the $20 a month subscription. And the same is true on Claude, which I know both of us been using kind of as our default model at this point. Yesterday, I built a whole app this actually works and is useful just using Claude code without looking at any of the codes. And Gemini just released a new ability in its studio yesterday, which I haven't even had a chance to look at. So we're seeing kind of some development of these other models, which I know we also think is important, right? When our book on AI pluralism that you edited, we talked about how we don't want to have dominance by one model and even some different agent abilities within those models. We'll talk about that some other time. But it is important, when I talk to a lot of people, they've all heard of ChatGPT. There are a lot of people who haven't heard of Claude. And I think most people agree that generally speaking, this is probably the top model. It has some strengths and weaknesses in particular areas relative to the others. But really, probably what is the top model now? most of the public is completely unaware of this. So that is kind of important to understand moving forward.
Also, an aspect of this that's really interesting and tying back to AI pluralism is the way that the use of different models will give you different outputs for different strengths and weaknesses. A friend shared an email with me about a platform that maybe we'll be able to talk about after we've had a chance to test it. But its selling point was that you can use all of the models concurrently within a process, a work process. And we see this happening with a lot of sub-agents and agents where agents might be using different models. Sub-agents will be using even different models from different providers, and that they each have the strengths that they could bring to it. The initial impulse for that is that you do that because they each have strengths. They can do certain things, certain tasks better in some situations than others. That's part of the reason for it. But tying it back into the idea of pluralism is that it also offers different model perspectives within this. And of course, this should lead us to an understanding that we should be prompting debate within the interactions that we have online and embedding that within these AI systems. And we'll certainly get into that to a later episode, but keep that on your radar. The understanding that the different models have different perspectives. They are trained with different materials. They're trained with different architectures. It's like having different super geniuses that are able to bring to bear their unique abilities. And if we can find a way to get them to work together or use them in different ways within our workflows, I think that can lead to a better product. And it'll certainly tie back into what we want to talk about further with AI pluralism. Now moving on to AI tools, and we're moving from content production to doing. And it's a lot like that move from chatbot to agent. And it's a shift that most people aren't really aware of, especially most of those 900 million using ChatGPT, and they just think about it as a simple chatbot. They're not recognizing this shift. And this is another area of divergence between those that are moving with the exponential and those that are potentially going to be left behind.
And here we just kind of see, when AI was like making things, right? It was generating images, generating video, generating music, generating voice. I mean, the voice applications now are really incredible, especially from 11 Labs. It can listen to your voice for a few seconds and then replicate your voice or anything you're saying, which obviously has security implications, but it just shows the power of the technologies and obviously the writing and that. I mean, we're all aware of that, right? That's just really improved. But now we see the shift, right, as you were talking about, from AI that can produce things to actually AI that when you give it a goal, it can go out and it can do some work. It can work autonomously for hours.
Now we're starting to look at how AI agents are emerging and moving from just vibe coding and doing very simplistic tasks to really working as autonomous personal assistants. And there's a great quote here from Jensen Huang from Nvidia saying, in 10 years, we'll have hopefully 75,000 employees, and he's referencing Nvidia, as small as possible and as big as necessary, finding that sweet spot. Those 75,000 employees will be working with 7.5 million agents. The agents will be working around the clock. We're going to solve some really incredible problems. And when we think about the use of chatbots and people talked about increasing their productivity, there was a pronounced difference in terms of working with or without a chatbot. When you think about agents, that just compounds it. And it certainly moves us further up that exponential.
And, like you said, we kind of started off, first we had, vibe coding, which just meant, you'd have your agent go do some work, do some coding. Then we started having the agents and the vibe coding process work together to build different parts of the code, to like test each other's parts of the code, then to check for security and all these types of things and support the deployment. Then we had the breakout of OpenClaw, which we've talked about on other podcasts where, you can even just kind of, text from WhatsApp and you can have your OpenClaw, can use your computer and go out and do some work. There are a lot of kind of security challenges with that initially, but then, we start seeing kind of regular companies. OpenClaw was acquired. It was acquired by OpenAI, the people who built Notebook. Facebook acquired them. And, Nvidia built yesterday, and I had a chance to look at it. It's hard to keep up. I saw somebody post about it on LinkedIn that they were already using it. They built an OpenClaw environment to protect the safety and the security. I know you texted me yesterday morning because Claude released a thing. I haven't even installed it yet, where you can interact with Claude, co-work from your phone, and then of course it can use your computer. I've seen articles about how this is exploding all over China, and China's really actively promoting, OpenClaw, but OpenClaw type tools, and they want companies to build with one or very few employees. They're actually providing office space for these companies to do that, and U.S. companies are going to have to compete with them. So this becomes a lot about the agent. Obviously, I think some people are underestimating, replacement, right? Like this is going to replace some workers. Nvidia is talking about, right, we just say 75 million agents and 75,000 employees. I looked up, they have about 45,000 now. So, okay, they would double. But, if you think about a company that's, worth what still I think is hovering around $4 trillion when you're looking into the future. With 75,000 employees, they're probably thinking, well, we're going to be worth $10 trillion, right? But they have a company that's worth $10 trillion. They only, 75,000 employees is not a lot. We talked about how Kodak at its peak, I think in the 80s had like 65,000 employees in Rochester alone, right? So, so there is a diminution of kind of human employment, but with, as noted, a lot of capacities. And Jensen also said that this is like, where people call it the ChatGPT moment, right? Where it finally basically worked and more people started using it and the awareness of AI grew. He's like, OpenClaw, like this is an OpenClaw moment. We've been talking about agents for a while, right? Even 2024 said agents were coming in 2025. Some people, I knew they didn't want to talk about agents. We're all like on a podcast together, not this one. They're like, I want to talk about something that's, that's real. And I'm like, well, they're coming, right? And agents they came out in 2025. They weren't great, but now they're basically working and they're able to solve math problems, the top math problems. And some, as we discussed, a math problem they didn't even think humans would be able to solve. So, this is, this probably is a ChatGPT moment. It's the next layer. I think schools that are especially still struggling with kind of the ChatGPT moment, right? Not even really fully aware of that and like what that means for education. And now we have something that they're not even aware of. These kind of functioning agents, regardless of what we want to call them, and what that means for education.
Two things I want to add to this discussion. The first is that I'm a little more optimistic about what this means for the job market, only not to say that jobs won't be displaced. They're going to be displaced. They're already being displaced now, but there's an opportunity for individuals to be able to make great use of the skill set they have, especially for those that have a strong foundation or expertise in a particular area, to be able to use a team of agents to be able to radically impact their work, maybe 10x or greater, the kind of work that they're able to do if they're able to employ that within their workflow. There is a scenario where if people build up those skill sets, they learn how to be able to manage and to be able to operate with agents, that it could expand GDP growth, it could expand the economy, and that maybe those people don't have to be replaced or displaced, but that they could actually increase the workload that they're able to produce. So there's a possibility for that. And I think certainly if you're watching this podcast, you're probably in the group that's ready to make that kind of a move. And that's what we need to prepare our students for. The second point that I want to make about this is when you look at this timeline, as Stefan was mentioning, in 2025, we had agents, and there were kind of rudimentary form agents. We saw them, your most likely interaction was within something like deep research, where they were doing a use of sub-agents to be able to go out and conduct the research and bring it back. And it would take quite a while to be able to produce it. They will take a while to be able to produce that kind of work. That probably has more to do with the friction associated with finding materials online than actually processing anymore. But it's timeline. In November, late November, Peter Steinberger released OpenClaw, and it was over winter break that people started really making use of it, exploring it, and then it just exploded, and people, it became really popular. And so in January 2026, as Stefan pointed, OpenClaw breaks out. Even if you go back to the end of November, it's only been 4 months since that was introduced. And when we think about what that impact has been, it's not that it created agents, but it created a mechanism by which people could use those agents for autonomous action. And as a result, not only has OpenClaw broken out, you see Nvidia within those 4 months developing NemoClaw. You see OpenAI acquiring OpenClaw. You see Perplexity releasing Computer. You have Cowork that's released in that time. There's an explosion and a radical reaction by all of these different companies. And maybe they were all working on this on their own and they aren't reacting to OpenClaw, but they were already kind of developing something similar. But when you think about how quickly that has changed, that's the timeline that we're really working with. It's more compact. The changes are happening more frequently. The changes are actually more profound than people realize because they just hear, well, I've heard about agents for over a year. Okay, yeah, this is a new agent. It's really different than anything people have experienced. That's a great example of how this timeline exponential is really changing development of products, deployment of products and use of them. And we're going to expect to see that happening even faster. It's not going to be 4 months before we have the next big breakthrough. It's going to be probably a matter of just weeks before we have something else. And I would imagine in this next quarter, by the middle of summer, most people that are active users on AI are going to start deploying agents, using agents in this way. And the only thing that's going to limit it is probably access to compute.
And, this is just, kind of a little bit more kind of, on the OpenClaw, right, that we've been talking about, but also at Princeton, right, how they came up with kind of a framework, right, to train these agents, which just shows like how quickly they're going to advance when basically any interaction between themselves also becomes training data, right? So you have kind of this just kind of continually reinforcing process, right? The same way that we learn, right? We both learned some things preparing for this podcast, and we're learning things in real time, like from the discussion, right? Where we see ideas being generated or clarified or discussed, right? This isn't just a process through which information is transmitted, but also a learning process for ourselves, which, some people kind of underestimate. And so we're going to just see the continued rapid advances and the capabilities of these claws and agents. And
now, this is something Sarah mentioned that just came out from Nvidia this week, enterprise AI agents. And what's important about this is to think about how quickly then major companies like Nvidia are developing the sandbox approach to be able to address security. This is all about being able to deploy something like OpenClaw without the same worries that prompt injections or other security vulnerabilities will give access to a lot of your personal information. This is really something we need to dig into. I haven't had a chance to use it either yet, but I think we're going to see this happen and develop by pretty much every company. It'll be interesting to see what Anthropic does, because Claude's co-work and Claude Code are pretty distinct products now, and they're certainly very useful. Co-work works on your own computer. They added in that dispatch feature, as Stefan mentioned, where you can access it running on your own computer. I think they're going to have to take that a little bit further and be able to give you greater access to it and give it more autonomy. I think it'll be easier for them because it's really just a matter of a small step increase in terms of capabilities. But we're going to see this from every company, and I think most people will have access to a fairly secure, autonomous agent network within whatever provider they're going to be using. And I would expect we're probably going to have that in a matter of weeks.
Yeah. And, it just kind of makes me think, because now people, right, are securing the environments. I remember listening on the Moonshot podcast when, Dave Blunden said, oh, I want my mom to be able to use kind of Agent Claw. And he said, like, she's 90 years old, right? So, and then I saw another article about how in China, they want all the grandmas to be able to use it as well. So this is going to be something that's like really easy to use, just like texting on your phone or your WeChat or your WhatsApp or whatever, right? It's going to be that simple. As easy it is to order from Amazon. And, obviously all security vulnerabilities may not disappear, but obviously if you use Amazon or some other website, there's some chance that your credit card can be stolen, and you got to deal with the hassle of getting the products, right, reversed and the sales reversed. And, there's laws that protect against that, right? They have to give you refunds and all those types of things. And obviously the U.S. political environment's kind of a bit unstable at the moment, but we may see some laws kind of emerge about liability in that direction. But, it's kind of the Wild West at the moment. But you see the companies act on their own to really protect the security, because people were going to be afraid to use it, right? I mean, even the people on the Moodshots podcast, you have a lot of the person, even with probably the most technical knowledge, was kind of afraid to deploy the open clause, and the others did it with a lot of caution and support from others, right? So, until kind of your average person is ready to use this, but that's all going to be done, right? Like, it's all going to be provided. People don't worry about the security on their computer. They may buy some kind of security software or those types of things, but they're not out there securing the apps themselves. And we're seeing that environment just kind of forming on its own now through the private sector.
Perplexity Computer is a great example of how the companies are already developing consumer-friendly agentic model systems. And I've had a chance to play around with this a little bit. It was just launched at the end of February. It's been expanded earlier in March, on March 11th. And they made it available for people with just $20 a month accounts, the equivalent of that, to have some credits to be able to test it out. And I've done a couple of projects with this, and it's quite impressive. It's very akin to Claude's co-work, very similar to that. It's not quite to the same level of autonomy that you might find with OpenClaw, but it's very close. You can actually schedule actions. You can have it running continuously in the background. You can use multiple different AI models simultaneously. They're not really relying on their own built models, Perplexity, but they're incorporating Claude models, OpenAI models, other models that are available, and you can set them it'll run it so that it'll run the right model for particular tasks, and it'll have an agent run sub-agents to be able to handle specific problems as it's working through it. It's fast. It's all online, so you don't have to just run it on your local device. And that means you can access it from different browsers. It can run in the background. And it's definitely something that is a good example of how I think all of the companies are going to be providing this kind of level of access. It's probably going to be subscription based and have to charge for it because it takes a tremendous amount of compute to be able to run something like this. But I think we're going to find that cost point dropping, and we're going to find a safer and easier access point through something like this from every company before very long. I think in the coming weeks, we're going to see a lot of this happening. You can see some of the claims they have that, 3.25 years of work in 4 weeks being done, $1.6 million in labor cost savings, 16,000 plus queries benchmarked against McKinsey, Harvard, MIT, BCG. It is a really remarkable tool. And when you are able to deploy it with an adequately sophisticated project, you start to see really what it's capable of. This will be another sticking point, and that is a really important one for somebody that's used to using a chatbot. If you just take a simple query, a simple task, and you give it to something like Perplexity Computer or to OpenClaw, you'll get a response and you'll say, well, it might be a little faster than when I use ChatGPT, but it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. It's when you start to give it something really complex with detailed structure, with an understanding of how it'll be assessed and what the reiteration process will be like. And you can build in so that the agent is able to evaluate its output, be able to improve upon that output and make changes and revise it and develop it until it meets the standards that you've outlined. That's when you see the real capabilities of an agentic autonomous system like this. And until you have it really demonstrated through a project like that, it's hard to get an understanding of what it's really capable of.
And, here I want to talk a little bit about kind of AI beyond the browser, that basically kind of AI is everywhere, right? Which kind of, in some ways it's like schools are still talking about restrictions, which, I understand it in certain contexts, right? But this general, kind of question of AI yes or AI no is kind of not really relevant anymore. And, here's just obviously it's in a lot of browsers. OpenAI has their own browser. You just talked about kind of Perplexity Computer. They also have Comet. It's in the browser, right? There's a Claude, Chrome. It's all embedded in there. And there's a Claude Chromework extension, which actually you can kind of work collaboratively with Cowork and all these other types of things, right? But it's kind of basically everywhere, right? And then it's also kind of now you can combine kind of Claude, Excel, and PowerPoint, and not just you can use Excel with Claude and PowerPoint with Claude. You can actually use they're kind of synced together. So if you have some data in Excel, it'll just kind of generate in PowerPoint. ChatGPT is now kind of integrated with Excel. Obviously, Gemini is across all of your Google Workspace at this point, and including some personal intelligence. And then, we have all the developer tools, which are kind of basically in some ways kind of embedded, right? I mean, you can use the Cowork coding tool right there, right? You can use it right in there. And, there's in ChatGPT, there's a special kind of coding model, but for most things that most people are using, you don't really need that, right? So, I mean, we just kind of have, and we talk about how it's on phones and in eyeglasses and coming to contact lenses and eventually, into brain computer interfaces. So it really needs to be about how we're kind of empowering people to use intelligence, to use it both to improve themselves and to take action. And, here I'll make a point. A couple of people shared this. 2 different people I noticed shared this. I meant to put each other's names in the comments because I don't know if they were connected. But the idea, in this anthropic usage of how people are using AI, right? 80,000 people came out. And, it said students, in a way, it was kind of disempowering some traditional students because they were just using the AI to do their schoolwork, right? Which is kind of a problem, right? So it disempowers them. But it found that tradespeople and other people who just wanted to learn things, right? When they went and they actively learned, they did learn right? From ChatGPT or whatever AI they were using, and it was very empowering to them, right? Which is hard. I've seen a couple of people recently do like, well, I'm going to look at all the studies that have been done on AI and education and draw some kind of conclusions as to what the totality of the studies means. Education is so broad and AI is so broad, and how it's being used kind of, to me, make a study or meta-analysis like that not tremendously useful. I mean, it's useful to read through and see what the different studies have concluded, but I don't think you can draw any meta conclusion. Man, I guess you can draw the study of like, well, if we just maintain traditional schoolwork and kids use AI for that, it can be disempowering and they can learn, and people with agency who want to learn stuff, that's where we need to be. And I think two things. One, that's kind of becoming obvious, and I've kind of said it from the beginning. It really just depends on how you're using it. But two, we do need kind of instructional redesign, as Jerry Krishy says, and we need to move to some alternative approaches to learning, like games and debate and experiential learning, all these things that we've been talking about. And that's really kind of becoming essential. And three, I think it's for some. I guess there's a reason, but we almost don't want to tell students what's going on. Like, we don't want to tell students that we kind of always had this traditional thing where, hey, you sit in the seat, and I don't mean like tie you into your seat, but you kind of go into this traditional classroom, and as long as the knowledge that's in the professors or the teachers' heads kind of gets to your head, that you can go to college, maybe one of your choice, and you can at least kind of achieve this middle class lifestyle as a knowledge worker, and that's basically over. It's already over. We have no idea at best, like what the future of that is. Right. It seems like it's struggling, and the people who are going to succeed are the people who are empowered with this technology, who have opportunities beyond traditional education or even within the traditional educational system to use the AI in empowering ways. It's there. You need to take advantage of it. And those are the people who, whether it's through a job, like, you talked earlier, okay, well, you're not as pessimistic on jobs. I agree. But you're going to have to be AI empowered. And I'm also not as pessimistic on there's nothing to do, right? Like, I think even if you struggle to get a regular job, there's a lot you can do to empower yourself with AI. But that message has to be communicated. It's almost like the reverse message is being communicated, that if you stay away from AI and you just kind of go through a traditional curriculum, both in terms of content and process, that everything's going to be okay. And I just don't believe that anymore.
Yeah. I completely agree with you in this, Stefan. I think the challenge that educators are facing right now is that it's not that many of them are intentionally misleading their students or telling them, false information about this. It's that educators, administrators, most of society has never faced the type of change that happens at this rate of pace and at this level. When we're talking about exponential change for something that is profound as artificial intelligence, impacting every sector of society, it is imperative that we get the word out to educators and to students that it no longer is possible to simply avoid AI. You can't just put AI in a box or say it's outside of the realm of what we're doing in this classroom. It has permeated society, and it is so ubiquitous at this stage that we have to confront it by talking a bit about what is the AI literacy plan for our students, at the very least, to discuss how do you encounter AI, where is it that you're encountering it, what should you do to think critically about the use of AI in different ways. And that's just scratching the surface. And then we need to be able to rapidly get to the point where we can deploy some of these new changes in our curriculum. Project-based learning, returning to the incorporation of oral communication and debate to be able to effectively equip our students with the skills they're going to need. This is rapidly changing, and we don't know exactly where it's going to be going. At the very least, we have to open that conversation. And I think if you're part of this podcast audience and this community, that we all need to reach out to educators that we know, to school districts that we have access to, and let them know that it's time to start changing your perspective on this. It's time to start incorporating discussion of AI into the classroom to make sure that you're starting to plan ahead. And otherwise, I'm afraid it's just going to be too late.
And, so just kind of some key takeaways, like you say, the scaling laws that you debated are generally holding, even if there's some diminishing returns. And we are expecting kind of radical changes, right? Morgan Stanley's pretty well connected to the top companies in the U.S., right, and the world. So they're being told, hey, radical changes are coming. I know people sometimes just don't want to believe this stuff, that it's happening. But two, right, we do have like a little bit of an infrastructure bottleneck. That's one thing that will slow this down, right? We only have so much energy, and we only have so many data centers. Basically, data center demand is it's a capacity right now. So that'll slow things down a little bit. And then the process of whether it goes into traditional companies or those traditional companies get unseated, I think we'll see a bit of both, right? That'll take a little bit of time. And
Let me say that infrastructure being the bottleneck. And the other thing that we should be ready for, and you're already starting to see, is that the use of locally run models will make it easier for people to incorporate AI into their workflow in an agentic way, so that you don't need, and we've talked about examples of this, Stefan brought up, I think, last week in the episode, where there was an example of somebody using something like OpenClaw for doing really advanced coding, a number of agents. They ran a number of sub-agents locally on their own hardware so that it didn't have to be run in a data center. Now, it's still using energy, but it's not the same level of energy as if you were just running it through an API key with a data center. You run all the sub-agents, and once in a while, you bring in the more advanced agent to double-check the work. Think creatively about what that might mean. Don't think that the bottleneck just means that we won't be able to expand. It'll slow down deployment. It'll slow down the use. It'll slow it down a bit, but it's also going to result in more creative applications, and we need to be ready for those as well.
And, like I said, there's, we call it a platform war. I think there's demand for more than one companies, but people should look into kind of more than just ChatGPT. At a minimum, they should probably be using some Claude and some Gemini as well. And then we're really moving into agentic AI. And, that's really some people are thinking about this, but, even people working on AI in education, generally, there's really a small subset that are really kind of thinking through agents and talking about agents at presentations. So that needs to get opened up. And then, of course, like I said, AI is everywhere. It's really just kind of a question of how we choose to use it, which requires a lot of individual responsibility for ourselves, and maybe more individual responsibility than we've required for our students for a long time. We've talked about them being responsible, but we kind of made it. We've done everything we can so they can't quote unquote cheat and show up, and we have attendance requirements and all these kind of things. So we've kind of created these educational institutions around kind of the monitoring, protection, surveillance of students, requirements that they do particular things. And, that kind of whole way of thinking is probably not really going to get a student very far. It may get you the absolute basic foundations, but what they really need is agency, empowerment, responsibility. And, some people say, well, some students aren't like that. It's like, okay, but if you just force them through this other method, it's not really going to help them very much anyhow, right? We got to take a chance with these students and really kind of inculcate those values and approaches to learning.
The most important key takeaway from this is the same message that we've had in other episodes. It's important that we engage in these discussions, that we prompt these conversations in our schools with other educators, with parents, with students, so that we can start to get our heads around what exactly is happening and how we're going to be able to respond. The more we can raise awareness, the easier it will be to respond. And it's never going to be easy. It's just going to be easier if we start to equip our students with an understanding of what's happening, and they have then a framework with which they can act. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll have more updates next week, as well as some other interviews coming up in the coming weeks. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Stefan.
Thank you, On.